6:36 coming up to 6:37 in Trinidad and Tobago. Again, a pulsating finish to the first Cricket World Cup final. New Zealand through to the final for the first time after 6 previous semi-final losses. Heartbreak for South Africa once again. One of the tournament favourites failing to make it to their first World Cup final with a 6 off the penultimate delivery from South African-born Grant Elliott, who was dropped off a skyer in the previous over. New Zealand getting to their target. We'll give you the details during the course of the morning once again. But New Zealand are through with a penultimate ball victory, and now they'll await to see the winners of tomorrow's night semi-final between defending champions India and 3-time winners Australia. Four-time winners Australia for the final on Saturday night our time in Melbourne, Australia. All right, let's get back to this situation of the police roadblocks and searches and all that went on yesterday. Were they illegal? Were they within conformity with the law for a legal perspective? On the matter, we're joined on the telephone now by Attorney at Law and member of the Police Service Commission, Martin George. Very good morning to you, Mr. George.
Yeah, hi, good morning to you, Fazil, and good morning, Trinidad and Tobago.
Were the police breaking the law yesterday?
Well, Fazil, the police do have the authority to conduct roadblocks. And if one looks at our local case law, I mean, separating apart from the Police Service Act and what obtains under the Motor Vehicle and Road Transport Act, Chapter 4850 of the laws of Trinidad and Tobago, there's also the local case of Ijaz Bernardine and the Attorney General of Trinidad and Tobago, where you had Justice Raj Kumar, who said that police officers had reasonable and probable cause to attempt to stop the claimant's vehicle and investigate at a roadblock, as the claimant had attempted to evade police officers by overtaking a line of traffic and driving onto the priority bus route. Now, that was a particular circumstance, but then you also have the other case of Parasam Mitchell versus the Attorney General of Trinidad and Tobago, where Justice Harris described a roadblock as routine and that it was performing a core police function, which was inclusive of asking a driver for his driving documents. So, on the face of it, yes, the police do have those powers. Now, if it is that you are hearing, and I don't know how accurate those reports are, if you are hearing that police officers were checking to see the level of oil in your engine and those things, then I'm not sure that the law provides that power to police officers. It does provide that type of power to transport officers in uniform. And they do have a much wider power when it comes to inspection of vehicles and checking for all things necessary. So if it is that the police officers were going over and beyond their limit of authority, then of course they would have been wrong. But they do have that basic power in terms of a roadblock.
And in that sense, Mr. George, isn't it essentially because they would be fully aware of the parameters legally as to which they could act, the boundaries that they could stretch or push? Wasn't this basically what was done? Utilize, because they are an essential service and can't strike, can't take industrial action, it was essentially about using the framework of the legal restrictions and just interpreting it conveniently.
Well, I would certainly think so, and I think it really stretches credibility for anyone to suggest otherwise. For this to have been such a coordinated and massive nationwide effort, one would certainly want to applaud the police officers if it is that this were, say, for instance, the search for Dana Sitahal's killer or some investigation.
Do you believe that, Mr. George?
So many of the long... Oh, no, I say if it were that, of course we know that's not the case. They've not said so, so we know that's not the case. But this is what I'm saying. If they can do this to press what appears to be a case in terms of wage negotiations, and of course we have no direct proof of that, but as I say, we are all able to look at things and analyze with our common sense. If they're able to do that, then one wonders why it is that they have not been able to solve so many of the major outstanding crimes, because clearly they've shown tremendous ability to be very organized, very disciplined, very dedicated. Then why is it that we have such an issue with a spiraling crime wave? They've shown that they can do it. So let's get that applied in the proper direction also.
Surely the big issue, though, Mr. George, while we're talking about assuming and pretending and if and maybe, are we in a situation where this has brought home to clearly and squarely that there must be some different and more effective mechanism when it comes to wage and salary and negotiations involving members of the essential service, because they are constrained by the existing regulations, but in some cases, as clearly in this case, they feel so moved as to take the necessary action to get their point across. Does it mean that the legal framework for these negotiations as ongoing with the CPO, that this is really the issue, that there needs to be a much more effective and functioning system to allow for these matters to be settled?
Well, I'm not sure if it's so much a question of the legal framework as to the actual economics of the scenario. In other words, there's no difficulty with the process that has been engaged in that they've had meetings with the CPO, and the police officers are not complaining about the process. What they're complaining about is the offer that's on the table and the results of that process. But the process itself, I don't think there's any legal issue to be fixed with the process, because it would really take it out of context if one were to say, well, look, we have to change the legislation to allow members of an essential service to engage in normal industrial type action. So I'm not sure we should at all even consider, tampering with the legal process. But
sure.
Certainly what they were looking at is the actual mechanics of the economics of the situation. And I mean, in credit to the police officers, it was definitely a very novel and very clever approach to take. However, the effect on the public is something that I think they ought to have considered a bit more sensitively when embarking on this action.
Point taken, and in relation to that, but you wasn't this the intention? You say, maybe they should have thought out more clearly
well, yes,
the impact. Wasn't this the intention?
That was clearly the intention. But I just want to mention something, and I think it's an interesting thing that we need to explore in Trinidad and Tobago. There's a Jamaican case where a leading judge in Jamaica, Justice Batt, he ruled that the police in Jamaica, under their Road Traffic Act, have no power to arbitrarily stop and search motor vehicles. He said that the police can stop and search any person or vehicle or anything, but they must have reasonable grounds for suspicion. And I think that in Trinidad and Tobago, we need to start looking at that, because I have seen circumstances where police officers, for no apparent reason, seem to think that they can exercise this authority to just stop anybody arbitrarily. And I have always held the view that there must be some basis for so doing, because, in other words, it must be that, okay, maybe you were looking for a vehicle looking like mine or somebody looking like me, or you had some reasonable information. And I think that we need to actually test this scenario in our courts to get some kind of ruling, the same way that the Jamaican judge was able to make a ruling and say that, look, there must be some basis for you stopping me. In other words, if I am a normal law-abiding citizen going to work, myself, wife, children in the car, and we're just trying to get to work, to school, etc., why are you stopping me and asking me, to display driver's permit and insurance? What's your basis for doing that? And if it is that you're looking for someone, then why are you stopping everybody in the line? It couldn't make sense, because if you recall on Friday, the first explanation that came out from the police public relations department was that they were looking for a white vehicle because they had some information. But then you stop in vehicle of every shade, color, and hue. So then clearly you could not be looking for a white vehicle, and clearly there was no basis for you stopping everyone in the line. And I think we need to explore this legally, and it's only when we get a ruling from our court on the powers of the police as to whether they can arbitrarily stop and search motor vehicles that this issue will be decided.
Mr. George, we just have a couple of minutes left, and we do appreciate you giving us your legal perspective as we assess the situation. But do you appreciate, sir, where the wider population will be saying, this may all sound fascinating for the legal fraternity and testing it out in the courts and so on, but just the debate as to what constitutes or how do you define reasonable grounds for doing something merely reinforces that an issue like yesterday it merely leaves the ordinary citizen as the victim of a process that continues to be essentially dysfunctional.
Right, and I'll tell you, Fazil, the importance of testing it legally is because if we do end up getting a ruling, such as they've done in Jamaica, which says that, look, there must be some reasonable basis for you, then clearly the police could not engage in an exercise like they did yesterday, where they stopped every vehicle on the line. Because they could not have a reasonable suspicion about every vehicle and every driver in a line of 1,000 cars. You see, so that's why it is important. And while it may sound as esoteric legal arguments, which may not impact on the day-to-day lives of citizens, the effect of a judgment in that regard would certainly have that trickle-down effect whereby the police must now justify why you are stopping persons in a stop-and-search roadblock activity.
Mr. George, thanks very much for giving us that perspective on the matter. Attorney at law and, of course, a member of the Police Service Commission as well. So, no doubt the lawyers will have a field day on this. You'll get all sorts of legal opinions from now until next Sunday's papers, when again they'll wax lyrical on all of these interpretations. In the meantime, we outside here will continue to catch our backsides dealing with the many issues of governance or lack thereof in Trinidad and Tobago. We'll be back right after this.